Hello everyone, welcome to my channel on cricket. Today we will look into how one of the biggest events in sport came into picture, the Cricket World Cup. Watched by millions across the globe, with cricket being the second most popular sport after football, the World Cup is one of the most prestigious trophies in the game of cricket. Before the Cricket World Cup, there had been none but one multi-nation tournament ever. In the first ever meeting of the newly formed Imperial Cricket Conference in 1909, the idea of a competition was put forward where all the three full members of that time, England, Australia and South Africa, would take part and would happen once every 4 years. And the first tournament was finally hosted by England in 1912. 9 test matches were played among the three teams in a triple round-robin format, and England were the eventual winners. But the tournament was a huge failure, largely due to rains and lack of crowds. A multi-nation tournament was never repeated after this. The idea of limited overs cricket was not very popular at that time, and the first ever limited overs tournament was a local tournament in Kerala organized by former cricketer K.V. Kellappan Thampuran. This was followed by a county cricket tournament between 4 teams. The new limited over format attracted a lot of TV coverage and media attention, and most importantly, crowds. The first ever one-day international finally happened in 1971 between England and Australia. In fact, it was the third test in the Ashes series, but the first 3 days were wiped out by rain, and a 40-over per innings match was arranged to decide the winner. Australia eventually won the first ever one-day international. The one-day international format received a huge boost when the first ever Women's Cricket World Cup was arranged to happen in 1973. Women's cricket was then administered by a separate body known as the International Women's Cricket Council. Sir Jack Hayward, an English businessman, proposed the idea of the tournament and also contributed towards the expense for arranging it. The tournament attracted decent crowd interest and media coverage, but most importantly led to a belief that an official tournament can happen. During the 1973 World Cup, plans were put in place by the ICC to have its first ever tournament in 1975. The initial plan was to involve all the 6 test-playing nations at that time. Over the next 2 years, the plans for the first ever men's tournament were finalized. The 1975 Cricket World Cup was to be hosted by England from 7th to 25th June. 8 nations from 5 confederations took part in the 1975 World Cup. Hosts England and the other full members, Australia, India, New Zealand, Pakistan and West Indies, received direct qualifications, while East Africa and Sri Lanka were invited to be a part of the World Cup and qualified via invitation. South Africa was supposed to be one of the teams in the tournament, but withdrew due to the apartheid laws in their country. They were not a part of the World Cup till the 1992 edition. The World Cup was officially called the Prudential Cup 1975 as they were sponsored by the Prudential Assurance Company. The 8 teams were split into groups of 4, where they played in a round-robin format followed by 2 semi-finals and a final. Each game was played in traditional white clothing with each innings comprising of 60 overs. 6 venues were selected across England for the 1975 World Cup, with the semi-finals at London and Leeds respectively, and the final was to be played at the most decorated cricket ground, the Lords in London. The 8 teams were split into 2 groups, Group A consisting of England, New Zealand, India and East Africa, while Group B consisted of West Indies, Australia, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. The first ever World Cup game was played between England and India at Lords. Each team in both the groups played 3 games each with one another, with England and New Zealand topping Group A and West Indies and Australia qualifying from Group B for the semi-finals. The first semi-final was between England and Australia, while the second semi-final was between West Indies and New Zealand. In the first semi-finals, the England team batted first and were all out for 93 runs, and Australia chased the target down with 4 wickets to spare. In the second semi-finals, New Zealand batted first and were all out for 158, and West Indies chased it down with 5 wickets in hand. West Indies and Australia qualified for the first ever World Cup final that was played at the Lords. The team batting first in both the semi-finals eventually lost the game, so the Australian captain Ian Chappell, on winning the toss, elected to field first. West Indies in reply managed to score 291 runs for the loss of 8 wickets, with their captain Clive Loyal top scoring with 102. In reply, Australia were bowled out for 274, with Keith Boyce picking up 4 wickets for 50 runs. West Indies emerged victorious by 17 runs. West Indies had won the first ever Cricket World Cup. What a moment it was, as the crowds raided the field to celebrate with the players. Cricket finally had a tournament that brought the world together. This was the story of the first ever Cricket World Cup. Today, the World Cup is one of the most viewed competitions in the world. Thank you for staying along. Stay tuned for some interesting stats and facts of the 1975 World Cup.